Marcus Thompson had always been the class clown. At 22 years old, he still carried that mischievous spark in his eyes that had gotten him into trouble countless times throughout school. His friends often joked that he would pull pranks until the day he died, and Marcus wore that reputation like a badge of honor. On this particular sunny afternoon in London, Marcus was walking through the bustling streets with his girlfriend Sarah and two of his best friends, Jake and Tommy. They had just finished lunch at a nearby cafe and were heading toward Buckingham Palace. Like thousands of other tourists did every single day, Sarah had been begging Marcus to take some normal tourist photos for once, instead of his usual silly selfies and random street shots. As they approached the famous black and gold gates, Marcus spotted an ice cream vendor parked along the sidewalk. The colorful cart was surrounded by excited children and their parents, all eager to get a cold treat on this unusually warm spring day. Without thinking twice, Marcus pulled out his wallet and bought the biggest, messiest vanilla soft-serve cone he could get his hands on. "What are you planning now?" Sarah asked, knowing that look in his eyes all too well. She had been dating Marcus for 3 years and could practically read his mind when it came to his pranking schemes. "Just getting some ice cream, babe," Marcus replied with an innocent grin that fooled absolutely nobody. Jake and Tommy exchanged knowing glances behind him, already preparing themselves for whatever chaos was about to unfold. The group made their way closer to the palace gates, where the famous royal guards stood in their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats. These guards were known throughout the world for their discipline, their ability to stand perfectly still for hours, and most importantly, their complete lack of reaction to anything happening around them. Tourists constantly tried to make the guards laugh, smile, or even blink. People would tell jokes, make funny faces, dance around like fools, and even bring props to try and get some kind of reaction. The guards had seen it all, and they never broke character. It was part of their job, part of their training, and part of what made them so fascinating to visitors from around the globe. Marcus studied the nearest guard carefully. The man looked to be in his 30s, standing perfectly straight with his rifle held at attention. His face was completely expressionless, staring straight ahead as if the hundreds of tourists around him simply didn't exist. His red uniform was pressed to perfection, every button polished, every crease exactly where it should be. "I bet I can make him move," Marcus whispered to his friends, taking a big lick of his ice cream cone. "Marcus, don't you dare," Sarah warned, grabbing his arm. She had learned to recognize the signs when one of his pranks was about to go too far. "These guys are serious. This isn't like pranking random people on the street." But Marcus was already walking closer to the guard, his ice cream cone held casually in his hand. The other tourists around them started to notice, some pulling out their phones in anticipation of whatever was about to happen. A few parents quickly ushered their children away, sensing that things might get interesting very quickly. Jake tried to call out to his friend, but Marcus was already in motion. He had that focused look on his face that meant there was no stopping him now. Tommy shook his head and started recording with his phone, knowing that whatever happened next would either be hilarious or completely disastrous. The guard remained perfectly still as Marcus approached, giving no sign that he even noticed the young man with the melting ice cream cone getting closer and closer to his position. Other tourists began to gather around, creating a small crowd of onlookers who sensed that something entertaining was about to happen. Marcus took one final look at his friends, winked at Sarah despite her obvious disapproval, and then did something that would change everything. In one swift motion, he reached out and smeared the entire vanilla ice cream cone directly across the guard's pristine red uniform, leaving a white sticky mess right across the man's chest. The crowd gasped. Sarah covered her face with her hands. Jake's jaw dropped open. Tommy kept filming. Unable to believe what his friend had just done, for a moment everything was completely silent. The guard didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. Marcus stood there with an empty cone in his hand, suddenly realizing that maybe this wasn't his best idea. The ice cream slowly dripped down the guard's uniform, creating white streaks against the bright red fabric. Then something happened that no one expected. The guard's eyes slowly moved down to look at the mess on his uniform, then back up to stare directly into Marcus's eyes. For the first time in what was probably years of standing guard, this man was about to break his silence. The moment the guard's eyes met Marcus's, everything changed. The air around them seemed to grow thicker, and the cheerful chatter of tourists faded into an uncomfortable silence. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized this wasn't going to end with laughs and high fives from his friends. The guard didn't just look angry. He looked dangerous. His jaw was clenched so tight that Marcus could see the muscles working beneath his skin. The man's eyes, which had been staring blankly ahead just seconds before, now burned with a fury that made Marcus take an instinctive step backward. "Sir," the guard said in a voice that was calm but carried an unmistakable threat, "you have just committed an assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Assault? He had just been trying to be funny. It was supposed to be a harmless prank, the kind of thing that would get a few laughs and maybe go viral on social media. He never intended for it to be considered assault. Around them, the crowd of tourists began to murmur nervously. Some people started backing away, suddenly realizing they might not want to be associated with whatever was about to happen. Others moved closer, their phones out and recording, sensing that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. I was just joking around," Marcus stammered, his usual confidence completely gone. "It's just ice cream, man. It'll wash out." The guard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached up to his radio with one hand while keeping his eyes locked on Marcus. The movement was deliberate and professional, and it sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This was really happening. This was really seriously happening. "Control, this is Guard Post 7, the man spoke into his radio with military precision. "I have a situation here. Request immediate backup and police response to my location. We have an individual who has just assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard." Sarah rushed to Marcus's side, her face pale with worry and embarrassment. "Marcus, we need to leave. Right now," she whispered urgently, tugging on his arm. But it was already too late for leaving. Marcus could hear the sound of running footsteps approaching from multiple directions. Other guards were abandoning their posts and moving toward the commotion, with a speed and efficiency that was both impressive and terrifying. Jake and Tommy stood frozen, watching their friend's prank spiral completely out of control. Tommy was still recording, but his hands were shaking now. Jake kept looking around nervously, as if trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. Within less than 2 minutes, Marcus found himself surrounded by 4 additional royal guards, all looking exactly as serious and intimidating as the first one. They formed a loose circle around him, not close enough to be threatening, but positioned in a way that made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. The original guard, still covered in melting vanilla ice cream, continued speaking into his radio. "Yes, sir. The individual is still on scene. We have him contained." The assault was witnessed by approximately 30 tourists, and multiple people appear to have recorded the incident. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the reality of his situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about getting in trouble with security guards who would give him a warning and send him on his way. The word assault kept ringing in his ears. People went to jail for assault. People got criminal records for assault. "Listen," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I really didn't mean any harm. It was supposed to be funny. Can we just forget this happened? I'll pay for the uniform to be cleaned or buy a new one or whatever you need." The guard finally broke his rigid posture slightly, taking a step closer to Marcus. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He was probably 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms that suggested he spent a lot of time in the gym. His face was weathered and serious, with the kind of expression that suggested he had seen much worse things than ice cream pranks. "Young man," the guard said, his voice carrying the weight of years of military training, "what you have done is not a joke. It is not funny. It is a criminal offense against a representative of the crown, and it will be treated as such." The crowd around them had grown larger, with people pushing and craning their necks to get a better view of the drama unfolding. Marcus could hear snippets of conversation from the onlookers, and none of it was good. "What an idiot," someone muttered. "Americans," another person said with disgust. Though Marcus was actually from Manchester, "He's going to get arrested for sure," came another voice. In the distance, Marcus could hear the unmistakable sound of police sirens getting closer. The sound made his heart race and his palms sweat. This was really happening. The police were actually coming for him because he had smeared ice cream on a guard's uniform. The police sirens grew louder and louder until 2 patrol cars came racing around the corner, their blue lights flashing and cutting through the afternoon sunlight. Marcus watched in horror as the vehicles screeched to a halt just outside the palace gates. 4 uniformed officers jumped out and began making their way through the crowd of tourists toward the commotion. Sarah grabbed Marcus's hand and squeezed it tight, her own hands trembling. "Oh my God, Marcus. What have you done?" she whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. The lead police officer was a stern-looking woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She walked with the confident stride of someone who had dealt with troublemakers many times before. Behind her came 3 male officers, all looking serious and professional, as they approached the group of guards surrounding Marcus. "What seems to be the situation here?" the lead officer asked, addressing the ice cream-covered guard with the respect due to a fellow member of law enforcement. "Ma'am, this individual deliberately assaulted me with a food substance while I was performing my duties," the guard replied, gesturing to the white mess still dripping down his uniform. The incident was unprovoked and was witnessed by numerous civilians. Marcus felt his legs go weak. The way they were talking about him made it sound like he had committed some terrible crime, not just pulled a stupid prank. He looked around desperately at the faces surrounding him, hoping to see some sympathy or understanding, but found only disapproval and disgust. The police officer turned to face Marcus directly, and he could see years of experience in handling difficult situations written across her weathered features. "Sir, I'm Constable Williams. I need you to remain calm and answer some questions for me. First, can you confirm that you intentionally placed ice cream on this guard's uniform?" "Yes, but—" Marcus started to explain. "No buts, sir. Just answer the questions," Constable Williams interrupted firmly. "Were you aware that interfering with or assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard is a serious criminal offense?" Marcus swallowed hard. "No, I wasn't. I thought it was just a prank. I didn't know it was illegal." "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, sir," the officer replied. "I'm going to need to see some identification, and then we're going to have to take you down to the station for questioning." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. The station. They were actually going to arrest him and take him to a police station. His mind raced as he tried to process what this meant. Would he go to jail? Would he need a lawyer? Would this go on his permanent record? Jake finally found his voice and stepped forward. "Officer, please. He's really not a bad guy. He just made a stupid mistake. Can't you just give him a warning or something?" Constable Williams turned her attention to Jake with a look that could freeze water. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and allow us to do our job. Your friend committed a criminal act in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses. This isn't the kind of situation that gets resolved with a warning." Meanwhile, Tommy was still recording everything with his phone, though he had become much more discreet about it. He kept the camera low and tried to blend in with the other tourists who were also documenting the unfolding drama. Deep down, he knew this footage might be important later, either for Marcus's defense or as evidence of what had really happened. The guard who had been assaulted was now speaking with one of the other officers, providing his account of events. Marcus could hear pieces of their conversation, and every word made his situation sound worse and worse. "The individual approached my position deliberately," the guard was saying. "He made eye contact, smiled in a way that suggested premeditation, and then smeared the entire contents of an ice cream cone across my uniform. The act was clearly intentional and malicious." Malicious? Marcus's heart sank even further. He had never intended to be malicious about anything. He was just trying to be funny, to get a laugh, to maybe brighten someone's day. The idea that anyone could see his actions as malicious felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Constable Williams returned her attention to Marcus, who was fumbling in his pocket for his wallet and identification. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely get his driver's license out of its plastic sleeve. "Marcus Thompson," the officer read from his license. 22 years old. Manchester address. She looked up at him with a mixture of disappointment and professional detachment. "Mr. Thompson, I am placing you under arrest for assault on a public official and disturbing the peace." The words seemed to echo in Marcus's ears as if they were being spoken from very far away. Under arrest. He was actually being arrested. This was really happening to him, Marcus Thompson, who had never been in serious trouble in his entire life. "You have the right to remain silent," Constable Williams continued, beginning the familiar recitation that Marcus had heard countless times in movies and television shows, but never imagined would be directed at him. "Anything you say may be given in evidence." As the officer continued reading him his rights, Marcus looked around at the faces of the people watching him. Some looked amused as if they were watching an entertaining street performance. Others looked disgusted, shaking their heads at his stupidity. A few seemed genuinely sorry for him, but those faces were vastly outnumbered by the ones that clearly thought he was getting exactly what he deserved. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo in his mind. He had never been handcuffed before, and the reality of it was much more frightening and humiliating than he had ever imagined. The metal was cold against his skin, and the cuffs were tight enough that he could feel them with every small movement of his hands. Sarah was crying openly now, covering her mouth with her hands as she watched her boyfriend being led away like a common criminal. "This is insane," she kept repeating to Jake and Tommy. "It's completely insane." It was just ice cream. But as Marcus was guided toward one of the police cars, he was beginning to understand that it was never just about the ice cream. It was about respect, about tradition, about the fact that the Royal Guards represented something much bigger than themselves. He had attacked not just a person, but a symbol of the British monarchy, and that made everything much more serious. The walk to the police car felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. Every step was witnessed by dozens of tourists, many of whom were still taking photos and videos. He could already imagine his face, plastered all over social media with captions like "Stupid," "Tourist gets arrested," or "American idiot assaults Royal Guard." VD, shame burned in his chest like a physical pain. Constable Williams opened the back door of the patrol car and placed her hand on top of Marcus's head as she guided him into the back seat, just like he had seen in countless movies. The interior of the car smelled like disinfectant and leather, and there was a thick plastic barrier between the front seats and the back. For the first time in his life, Marcus was experiencing what it felt like to be on the wrong side of the law. As the car door slammed shut, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the ice cream-covered guard through the window. The man was standing perfectly straight again, back in his professional position. But there was something different about his expression now. He looked almost satisfied, as if justice was finally being served. The drive to the police station was conducted in tense silence. Marcus sat in the back of the car, his mind racing with thoughts about what was going to happen next. Would he be thrown in a cell with dangerous criminals? Would he have to call his parents and explain what had happened? Would this affect his job, his future, his entire life? Constable Williams occasionally glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but she didn't speak. Her partner, a younger male officer, was making notes in a small notebook and speaking quietly into his radio. Marcus caught fragments of the conversation, words like detained, assault charge, and processing. The police station was a large, imposing brick building that looked like it had been standing for at least 100 years. As they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus could see people coming and going through the front entrance, some in handcuffs like himself, others who appeared to be victims or witnesses giving statements. Inside the station, Marcus was processed with the same efficiency that the police applied to every other criminal who came through their doors. His personal belongings were taken away and cataloged, his photo was taken from multiple angles, and his fingerprints were recorded. On an electronic scanner that looked like something from a science fiction movie, the booking officer was a heavy-set man in his 50s who looked like he had seen every possible type of criminal behavior during his career. He barely looked up at Marcus as he filled out the paperwork, treating him with the same bored professionalism that he probably applied to everyone who passed through his station. Thompson, Marcus, the officer read aloud as he typed, "Charged with assault on a public official and disturbing the peace. Any prior arrests?" "No," Marcus replied quietly. "Any medical conditions we need to know about? Taking any medications?" "No." The questions continued for several more minutes, covering everything from his employment status to his next of kin. Each answer was typed into the computer with mechanical precision, reducing Marcus's entire life to a series of data points in a criminal justice database. When the paperwork was complete, Marcus was led to a small holding cell that contained nothing but a metal bench and a toilet. The cell door clanged shut behind him with a sound that seemed to reverberate through his entire body. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he was completely alone with his thoughts. The cell was cold and smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals mixed with something unpleasant that Marcus preferred not to think about. The walls were covered with graffiti left by previous occupants, most of it profane or depressing. He sat down on the metal bench and put his head in his hands, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. Just that morning, he had woken up in his comfortable bed next to Sarah, looking forward to a fun day of sightseeing in London. Now he was sitting in a jail cell, facing criminal charges that could potentially ruin his life, all because he thought it would be funny to put ice cream on a guard's uniform. The minutes ticked by slowly in the holding cell. Marcus had no way to tell time, since his phone and watch had been taken away during the booking process. He tried to estimate how long he had been sitting there, but the stress and fear made it impossible to keep track. It could have been an hour, or it could have been 5 hours. Eventually, he heard footsteps approaching his cell, followed by the jangle of keys. A different officer appeared at the door, this one younger and slightly less intimidating than the booking officer had been. "Thompson," the officer called out, "your lawyer is here." Marcus looked up in confusion as the cell door opened. "My lawyer? I didn't call a lawyer." "I don't even have a lawyer," the officer shrugged. "Someone called one for you. She's waiting in interview room 3. As Marcus was led through the corridors of the police station, he wondered who could possibly have arranged for legal representation. His parents didn't even know what had happened yet, and he doubted that Jake, Tommy, or Sarah would know how to find a criminal lawyer on such short notice. The interview room was small and windowless, with white walls and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and sterile. Sitting at a metal table was a woman in her 30s wearing a sharp business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. She had dark hair pulled back in a professional style, and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything about Marcus's appearance in a single glance. "Mr. Thompson," she said, standing up and extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Chen, and I'm here to represent you. Please have a seat." Marcus shook her hand and sat down across from her, still bewildered about how she had come to be involved in his case. "I'm sorry, but I'm really confused. I didn't call a lawyer. I don't even know any lawyers." Rebecca smiled slightly, the first genuinely warm expression Marcus had seen since this whole ordeal began. "Your girlfriend called our office. Sarah, I believe?" She was quite distraught and explained the situation. "Our firm sometimes takes on cases where we feel the charges may be disproportionate to the actual offense committed." Relief flooded through Marcus as he realized that Sarah hadn't abandoned him. Even though he had dragged her into this nightmare with his stupidity, she was still trying to help him. It was more than he deserved, and he felt a surge of love and gratitude toward her. "Now," Rebecca continued, opening her briefcase and pulling out a yellow legal pad, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small or embarrassing they might seem." Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the day, starting with their decision to visit Buckingham Palace and ending with his arrest. Rebecca listened intently, occasionally asking questions for clarification, but mostly just taking notes in neat handwriting. When he finished his account, Rebecca set down her pen and looked at him seriously. "Marcus, I'm going to be completely honest with you about your situation. What you did was technically assault under British law. The fact that it was done to a royal guard makes it more serious. Not less serious." Marcus felt his heart sink again, but Rebecca held up a hand before he could respond. "However," she continued, "there are several factors working in your favor. You have no prior criminal record. The assault didn't cause any physical harm. You clearly had no malicious intent. And most importantly, we have video evidence of the entire incident that shows it was a foolish prank, rather than a genuine attack." "Video evidence?" Marcus asked. "Your friend Tommy never stopped recording," Rebecca explained with a slight smile. "Sarah gave me his contact information, and I've already reviewed the footage. It clearly shows that while your actions were incredibly stupid, they weren't malicious or threatening in nature." For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe his life wasn't completely ruined after all. Maybe there was a way out of this mess that didn't involve years in prison or a permanent criminal record. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait for your arraignment hearing, which should happen within the next 24 hours, Rebecca explained. "I'm going to push for bail, which I think will get given your lack of prior record and the non-violent nature of the offense. Then we start building your defense." "What kind of defense?" Rebecca consulted her notes before answering. "We're going to argue that while you technically committed assault, it should be treated as a minor public disturbance rather than a serious criminal offense. We'll emphasize your youth, your previously clean record, and the fact that no actual harm was done. We'll also highlight the fact that you immediately cooperated with authorities and showed genuine remorse for your actions. Marcus nodded, feeling slightly better about his chances. Rebecca seemed competent and confident, and she was certainly more knowledgeable about the legal system than he was. There's something else, Rebecca added, flipping through her notes. I've been doing some research on similar cases, and it turns out that assaults on royal guards are more common than you might think. Most of them result in community service, fines, and probation rather than jail time, especially for first-time offenders. Really? Marcus asked, hope growing stronger in his chest. Really? There was a case just last year where a drunk university student threw paint at a guard. He got 200 hours of community service and a fine. Another case involved someone who tried to knock off a guard's hat as a dare. Similar outcome. Marcus felt like he could breathe properly for the first time since his arrest. While his situation was still serious, it was beginning to sound like his life might not be completely over after all. However, Rebecca continued in a more serious tone, there is one complicating factor we need to discuss. The incident was filmed by dozens of people and has already started circulating on social media. The Crown Prosecution Service is under pressure to make an example of you because of the public attention the case is receiving. Marcus's brief moment of optimism crumbled. He had been so focused on the legal aspects of his situation that he hadn't even considered the social media implications. In today's world, nothing stayed private for long, especially not something as dramatic as a tourist being arrested at Buckingham Palace. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Marcus the screen. His stomach dropped as he saw his own face staring back at him from what appeared to be a news website. The headline read, Tourist arrested after ice cream attack on Royal Guard. Below the headline was a photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his face clearly visible and looking shocked and frightened. It gets worse, Rebecca said gently, scrolling through her phone. The video has been shared thousands of times on various social media platforms. There are news articles about it on at least 6 different websites. Someone even created a hashtag, Ice Cream Idiot. Marcus felt physically sick as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. It was one thing to face legal consequences for his actions, but having his stupidity broadcast to the entire world was something else entirely. He imagined his parents, his co-workers, his old school friends all seeing him being arrested like a common criminal. The good news, Rebecca continued, is that public opinion seems to be somewhat divided. Yes, there are plenty of people calling you an idiot and saying you deserve whatever punishment you get. But there are also quite a few people defending you, saying the response was excessive for what was essentially a harmless prank. She showed him some of the comments on the news articles. Mixed in with the harsh criticism were messages of support from people who felt sorry for him or who thought the whole situation had been blown out of proportion. I've been an idiot my whole life, one comment read, but at least I never did it in front of Buckingham Palace. Feel bad for this kid, said another. Yeah, it was stupid, but did he really need to be arrested? Couldn't they have just kicked him out? This is what happens when you disrespect the Queen's Guard, read a harsher comment. Hope it was worth it for his 5 minutes of fame. Marcus read through the comments with a mixture of shame and fascination. It was surreal to see strangers on the internet discussing his life and his choices as if he were a character in a television show rather than a real person with real feelings. The viral nature of this incident actually works both for us and against us, Rebecca explained. Against us because it puts pressure on the prosecution to pursue serious charges to save face. For us because it demonstrates that this was clearly a stupid prank rather than a genuine threat or attack. A knock on the interview room door interrupted their conversation. A uniformed officer entered and addressed Rebecca directly. Counselor, we need to wrap this up. The defendant's arraignment has been scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. He'll be held overnight pending the hearing. Rebecca nodded professionally. Thank you, officer. Could I have just 5 more minutes with my client? When the officer left, Rebecca turned back to Marcus with a reassuring expression. One night in jail isn't going to kill you, though I know it's scary. Try to keep your head down, don't talk to anyone about your case, and remember that this is temporary. What should I expect at the arraignment? Marcus asked. It's very straightforward. The judge will read the charges against you, you'll enter a plea of not guilty, and will request bail. Given the non-violent nature of your offense and your lack of prior record, I'm confident we'll get bail set at a reasonable amount. What's reasonable? For a case like this, probably somewhere between £1,000 and £5,000. Your girlfriend mentioned that you have some savings, so hopefully that won't be a problem. Marcus nodded, though the idea of spending thousands of pounds on bail money made his stomach turn. That was money he had been saving to eventually buy a house with Sarah. Now it would be spent just to get him out of jail. After we get you released on bail, we'll start working on your defense strategy, Rebecca continued. I'll be reviewing all the video evidence, researching similar cases, and preparing character references. We want to paint a picture of you as a basically good person who made a very bad decision, not as someone who poses a threat to public safety. Do you think I'll go to prison? Marcus asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at him since his arrest. Rebecca was quiet for a moment before answering. Honestly, I think prison is unlikely given the circumstances, but I can't make any guarantees. The prosecution might push for jail time because of all the media attention. The judge might want to make an example of you. There are too many variables to predict with certainty, but you think I have a good chance. I think we have a strong case for minimal punishment. Community service, probation, maybe a fine. But Marcus, even in the best-case scenario, you're going to have a criminal record. That's going to follow you for the rest of your life. The weight of that statement settled on Marcus like a heavy blanket. A criminal record. He had never really thought about what that meant before. Would it affect his ability to get jobs, to travel, to rent apartments? Would he have to check a box on applications for the rest of his life that marked him as someone who had been convicted of a crime? Another knock on the door signaled that their time was up. Rebecca gathered her papers and stood up, extending her hand to Marcus once more. Try not to panic, she said kindly. We're going to get through this together. I'll see you at the courthouse tomorrow morning. And we'll take the first step toward putting this behind you. As Marcus was led back to his cell, he tried to focus on Rebecca's words of reassurance rather than on the fear and shame that were threatening to overwhelm him. One more night in jail, then the arraignment, then hopefully bail and a chance to start fighting back against the charges that threatened to destroy his future. The night in jail was the longest of Marcus's life. The cell was cold, the fluorescent lights never turned off completely, and the sounds of other prisoners talking, arguing, and sometimes shouting made it impossible to get any real sleep. He spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous day over and over in his mind, wishing desperately that he could go back in time and make different choices. When morning finally came, Marcus was given a basic breakfast of toast and instant coffee before being transported to the courthouse in another police van. The courthouse was an imposing Victorian building with high ceilings and dark wood, paneling that made Marcus feel even smaller and more insignificant than he already did. Rebecca was waiting for him in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking professional and confident in her dark suit. She gave him a reassuring nod as the guards brought him over to where she was standing. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. "I've been better," Marcus replied honestly. "Did you find out anything else about my case?" "Actually, yes. I have some potentially good news," Rebecca said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I spoke with the prosecutor this morning and they're willing to consider a plea bargain." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "What kind of plea bargain?" "They would drop the assault charge in exchange for a guilty plea to disturbing the peace. That would mean community service, probably around 100 hours, plus a fine of about £800. No jail time and a much less serious mark on your criminal record." For a moment, Marcus felt overwhelming relief. No jail time meant he could go home, go back to work, and try to rebuild his life. But then the reality of the situation hit him again. Even with a reduced charge, he would still have a criminal record. He would still be someone who had been convicted of a crime. "What if we fight it?" he asked. "What if we go to trial and try to get the charges dropped completely?" Rebecca's expression became more serious. "That's certainly an option, but it's risky. If we go to trial and lose, you could face the full penalties for assault on a public official. That could mean up to 6 months in jail and a much larger fine. Plus, trials are expensive and time-consuming. But there's a chance I could walk away with nothing?" "There's a chance, yes. But honestly, Marcus, it's not a very good chance. You did assault the guard, even if it was just with ice cream. The video evidence is clear about that. The question isn't whether you did it, but whether the punishment fits the crime." Marcus was quiet for a moment, weighing his options. Take the plea bargain and accept a criminal record, but avoid jail time. or roll the dice with the trial and potentially face much worse consequences. The prosecution is also under pressure because of all the media attention, Rebecca continued. The story has been picked up by international news outlets now. There are articles about it in American newspapers, Australian websites, even some European publications. The Crown Prosecution Service wants to show that they take attacks on royal guards seriously. Before Marcus could respond, a court officer called out that his case was next. Rebecca gathered her papers and gave him one final piece of advice. You don't have to decide about the plea bargain right now. We can enter a not guilty plea today, get you out on bail, and then take some time to think about our options. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, but it was still intimidating with its formal atmosphere and serious-faced officials. The judge was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who looked like she had seen every possible type of criminal behavior during her career. When Marcus's case was called, he stood next to Rebecca as the clerk read the charges against him. Hearing the words "assault on a public official" read aloud in the formal language of the court made his stomach turn. It sounded so much worse than smeared ice cream on a guard's uniform. "How do you plead?" the judge asked, looking directly at Marcus. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The judge nodded and turned her attention to the question of bail. The prosecutor argued that Marcus might be a flight risk since he wasn't a local resident, but Rebecca countered by pointing out his clean record and the nonviolent nature of his offense. "Bail is set at £3,000, the judge announced after considering both arguments. The defendant is ordered to surrender his passport and to remain within the London metropolitan area until his trial date. Next case." 3 hours later, after Sarah had arrived with the bail money and completed all the necessary paperwork, Marcus walked out of the courthouse as a free man for the first time in 2 days. The sunlight felt amazing on his face, and the simple act of breathing fresh air that wasn't filtered through jail ventilation systems was like a gift. But his freedom came with conditions and complications. He had to stay in London until his trial, which meant taking extended leave from his job in Manchester. He had to check in with a probation officer twice a week. And everywhere he went, he had to live with the knowledge that people might recognize him as the ice cream idiot from the viral videos. Over the following weeks, as Rebecca prepared his defense and the media attention gradually died down, Marcus had plenty of time to think about the consequences of his split-second decision to smear ice cream on a Royal Guards uniform. He realized that some jokes simply weren't worth the price you had to pay for them. Some pranks had consequences that lasted far longer than the few seconds of laughter they might generate. In the end, Marcus accepted the plea bargain. 150 hours of community service, cleaning up parks and painting over graffiti in London neighborhoods. A fine of £800, a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life, and a hard-learned lesson about thinking before acting, especially when cameras are rolling and the whole world is watching. The ice cream had melted and been washed away within minutes of his arrest. But the consequences of putting it there would last forever.